I'm delighted to host this evening here in Rinat. And we'd asked the Mora D'Atra and a colleague of mine from Tradition, and really such a respected and thoughtful Jewish leader, Rabbi Chaim Strachler, to open our evening.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Weiss. It's a great privilege to be able to welcome you to Rinat this evening as we engage in the process of joy. And we are quite appropriately going to begin with song, as we're going to recite Acheinu together in just a couple of moments, as we appropriately enter this season with an appreciation for what's going on around the world. However, with that in mind, I'd like to take you just back a couple of hours, back into Shabbos, and specifically to how it is that we bring in Shabbos every week, with the words of Rav Shlomo Alkabetz Halevi, in bringing forward the ideas of Lechadodi. Rav lachem sheves be'emek habacha, v'hu yachamol alayich chemla. This Rav lach, this phrase that we know so familiar from the stories of Korach and Moshe Rabbeinu, that there's something about being be'emek habacha which is enough already. That we can and we must appreciate what Jewish history has when it comes to the tears, but we cannot stay within that valley. We must leave it. V'hu yachmol alayich chemla. And that this too is another aspect of when we speak about joy. If you have the privilege of going through this book, you'll find within it some really wonderful insights. Many from Rabbi Sacks, and many from his Talmidim. We're all his Talmidim in so many ways. And the ability to appreciate the nuance within Simcha. So whether we refer to it through the prism of happiness or through the prism of joy, whether we appreciate it through the framework of the Greeks or through the Torah, it's important for us to appreciate its many colors and be able to utilize it to bring us up. And it's in this regard that I'd like to share just one further insight with you, which I think is very appropriate for how it is that we begin Shabbat and how it is that we're going to begin this evening. And that is, every Shabbat, we come in understanding that we are an am medushne oneg. And we appreciate within the cycle of Jewish life that there are times in which we have to struggle. There are times that we have to work. But we build into every week an understanding, v'hu yachmol alayich chemla, that we experience that grace, we experience that joy, we experience that blessing every week. And so as we go through really an emek habacha now as a people, we must recognize that there is always that lifeline that we have to enjoy every Shabbos, every day, as we have that opportunity to bring a Kadosh Baruch Hu into our lives.
So I'm going to now welcome Dr. Shira Weiss, my incredible partner at the Sacks-Herenstein Center, the assistant director, who helped, who the two of us edited An Ode to Joy. I would say that she did the lion's share of the work. This is out through Palgrave Macmillan. It has over 40 contributors from Yeshiva University and beyond. These, as Rabbi Strachler mentioned, are many students of Rabbi Sacks. Gila Sacks wrote in the foreword, his daughter wrote in the foreword, that happiness did not come easy to Rabbi Sacks. He worked very hard at it. So with no further ado, Dr. Shira Weiss.
Thank you. We started this book project shortly after the Herensteins founded the Sacks-Herenstein Center in an effort to gather the voices of those who were close to Rabbi Sacks and those who were deeply influenced by his thought to perpetuate his legacy and his diverse teachings. And with forewords by his daughter Gila and Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, contributing authors include many YU faculty members, as well as leading scholars and writers from the US, the UK, and Israel. And one of the great strengths of Rabbi Sacks as a thought leader was his ability to draw upon ideas of so many different disciplines and integrate them in a way that enriches his themes and his lessons. And in that spirit, we've included in this volume academics and educators who explore the significance of joy in biblical, rabbinic, and Hebrew literature, in Jewish history and Jewish philosophy, in the arts, in education, and in positive psychology through the prism of Rabbi Sacks's work. The theme of joy was central to Rabbi Sacks's conception of Judaism. He wrote in essays on ethics, I think of Judaism as an ode to joy. And though he chose the theme prior to the war, its lessons have never been more necessary. Rabbi Sacks acknowledges happiness not only as part of a healthy emotional range, but as emblematic of a Jewish national soul, all too often stamped by difficulty and oppression. And he writes, Jews have known suffering, isolation, hardship, and rejection, yet they never lack the religious courage to rejoice. A people that can know insecurity and still feel joy is one that can never be defeated, for its spirit can never be broken, nor its hope destroyed. Gila Sacks notes that her father didn't take joy for granted, but put forth a lot of effort to achieve it. She writes in the foreword, it was not for Rabbi Sacks simply an emotion, something which came and left fleetingly, which one either felt or did not feel at any given moment. It was rather something to be worked at, learned, and earned. Nor was joy the absence of pain, the opposite of sadness, something to be found by overcoming or erasing the bad parts of life. Instead, joy had to coexist with sadness, each making space for the other, shedding new perspective on the other. Above all, for Rabbi Sacks, joy was active, something we could create through how we lived. In these times of profound pain, fear, and sadness, finding or creating joy is all the more challenging. And we hope that exploring this theme through the essays in our collection will allow our readers to uncover the joy that's deeply rooted within the Jewish tradition. And tonight we look to Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar to help us find joy in times of crisis. Dr. Ben-Shahar is an award-winning Harvard professor and best-selling author. In 2011, he co-founded Potential Life and consults and lectures worldwide on happiness and leadership. He's written the foreword to our book, and we're so grateful to have him here tonight to present at our launch event. Dr. Ben-Shahar.
What a great honor to be asked to write the foreword to the book and to be here with you tonight launching the book. I love Rabbi Sacks dearly. He's a person that, to me, like for many, is a teacher, a mentor, and a role model. I had the privilege of working with him and meeting him after we had already started working together as board members of Jerusalem U. We met by happenstance on a flight from Ben Gurion to Heathrow. And by happenstance, we sat next to each other. So I had a captive audience for 4 hours and 37 minutes, but who's counting? And what is memorable from this trip, I thought I was going to listen to a very long sermon from one of the world's greatest minds and hearts. And instead, what I listened to were many questions about positive psychology, the science of happiness. Questions that throughout our journey from Eretz Israel to England took me through a journey. And I reflected a lot about our time together. And I reflected a lot through the lens of leadership and the research that shows or that talks about the single most important characteristic of extraordinary leaders. Extraordinary leaders that are necessary and essential in extraordinary times, like today. And the number one characteristic of extraordinary leaders is not charisma. It's not eloquence. It's not strategic thinking. It's not IQ. These are nice to have, not essential. The number one necessary, essential characteristic of great leadership in extraordinary times is the ability to listen. Rabbi Sacks talks about it in one of his drashot. He writes about the time when God chose Moses to lead his people in extraordinary times. And of course, what was Moses' response when God picked him? Thanks, but no thanks. And the reason, the justification, because I stutter, I have a speech impediment, kvad pe ukvad lashon. And yet God chooses him, sending him and us the important message that the most important thing for a leader in extraordinary times is not their ability to speak, but their ability to listen. And what was extraordinary about Rabbi Sacks, among many other things, was that he walked his talk. He was an extraordinary leader. And we're fortunate to have been led by him and to continue to be led by him through the important work that we can read and that is being promoted, written about, elevated through the work of the Sacks-Herenstein Center. So I want to talk a little bit about finding joy in crisis. Because even bringing up the word joy or happiness during these days is somewhat challenging. You know, in Israel, when we greet one another, when we used to greet one another, we used to say, Ma inyanim, ma kore. We don't say that anymore because the answer to that is not sababa or achla or kef, fun. The answer is much more complicated than that. We're living through very difficult times. And to talk about joy today, to talk about happiness today, I mean, even during COVID, it was already challenging. You know, as one of my Israeli friends said to me, Tal, shouldn't we quarantine happiness at least for a while? And my answer to that then, as it is today, absolutely not. In fact, talking about joy, experiencing joy, talking about happiness, experiencing happiness is more important than ever. And I want to explain why. And I want to explain why through the lens of the science of happiness, the science of well-being, and through the lens of the work of Rabbi Sacks. So the short answer to why is it important to talk about happiness and joy today, the short answer lies in a word, a new word that was coined this century by NYU professor Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb talks about the idea of anti-fragility. What is anti-fragility? The opposite of fragility. Specifically, what it means is what I've come to call resilience 2.0. You know, today, in order to be cool, you have to have something 2.0, so I chose resilience. It's as good a choice as any. What is Resilient 2.0? Let's start with Resilience 1.0 and then build on that. Resilience 1.0 is actually a term taken from engineering. It refers to material that when you put pressure on it, or after you put pressure on it, it simply goes back to its original form. So you have a piece of rubber, you squish it. If it's resilient, you let go, it goes back to where it was before. Or a ball, you drop it. If it's resilient, it bounces back up to where it was before. This is why we talk about resilient individuals as bouncing back. So that's 1.0. Resilience 2.0 takes this a step further. Anti-fragility takes it a step further. You take a piece of rubber or any material, you squish it, you put pressure, stress on it. You let go, it doesn't just go back to where it was before, it actually grows bigger, stronger, better. Or a ball, you drop it, resilience 1.0 bounces back up. Resilience 2.0, anti-fragility, it bounces back higher. That's anti-fragility in a nutshell. So that's a new word. It was coined beginning of the 21st century. Adopted by millions who really connect to it. But actually, it's not a new word. Not in Hebrew. It's thousands of years old. In Hebrew, the word crisis is mashber. Now, if you trace mashber back to its roots, lashorashim, you have two options. It comes from the shorish, from the root, shin bet reish. Shin bet reish, shever, means to break, fragile. But there is another meaning to the word mashber. The second meaning of the word mashber, or the second direction in which that root takes us. So one is to break down. Mashber, a biblical word, is the chair upon which a woman sits when she gives birth. The chair upon which a woman sits when she gives birth. In other words, the place of the ultimate growth, human life. So when you experience a crisis, there are two options. One, break down. The other, build up. One, fragile. The other, anti-fragile. And that is the choice that we have. A choice that we have when we experience crisis. So let me say more about the idea of anti-fragility or mashber. It turns out that there are anti-fragile systems all around us as well as within us. Take, for example, our muscles. We go to the gym and we lift weights. What are we doing? We're stressing our muscles. But what happens as a result of this stress? As a result of the mashber, the crisis that we put our muscles in. As a result of it, after a month, 6 months, they actually grow stronger, bigger, healthier. We physiologically are an anti-fragile system. It turns out that not just physiologically. So I have a question for you. I actually want to see a show of hands. How many of you have heard of the term PTSD? Okay, most of us. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now I have a second question for you. Please put your hand up, not my students. Please put your hands up if you've heard of the term PTG. Okay, about maybe less than 10% for sure. So just about everyone has heard of PTSD. Only a very small number have heard of PTG. PTG stands for post-traumatic growth. So PTSD is fragile, shever. PTG, anti-fragile, mashber, growth. It turns out that PTG is potentially twice as likely as PTSD. PTG is twice as likely as PTSD. In other words, anti-fragility growth is twice as likely as breakdown fragility. If, and this is a very big if. First of all, we need to know about the existence of PTG. So simply knowing that when we face a mashber, a crisis, there is the option, the real option, the potential for growth. Just knowing that in and of itself makes it significantly more likely to happen. Doesn't guarantee it, but it makes it significantly more likely. And again, most people have never heard of it, don't know about that possibility, which means a great deal of lost potential. Why does merely knowing about it contribute to the likelihood that it will happen? Why? Because of hope. You see, the difference between sadness and depression. The difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope. One of the contributors, one of my teachers to this book is Professor Martin Seligman, the founder of the field of positive psychology, University of Pennsylvania. He did research before researching joy and happiness and optimism. He did research on depression. And he showed that the number one predictor of depression is the feeling, the experience of helplessness. Meaning that I cannot really bring about change, that I'm stuck. In other words, that I have no hope. But if I learn about anti-fragility, about post-traumatic growth, then I'm in a different place. Suddenly I have hope. Oh, this is hard. It's painful. It's difficult. It's traumatic. And I can grow from it. I can learn. Rabbi Sacks understood it with his heart and soul. He wrote, "There's always hope. You can lose everything else in the world, but Jews never lose hope." And that is what makes us so tough. Rising from mashberim, from crises, being anti-fragile. In addition to knowing, there are also conditions that we can put in place that significantly increase, they do not guarantee, but they significantly increase the likelihood that we will grow from hardship. Now, most people don't know about PTG or anti-fragility or resilience 2.0 or what mashber means. And most people certainly don't know what conditions to put in place that will significantly increase the likelihood that we will actually become anti-fragile. So what are these conditions? I want to talk about them based on the model of happiness that my colleagues and I have developed over the past 20-some years. And this is the Spire model of well-being. And these are the conditions that when you put them in place, it turns out, contribute to joy, to happiness, and the exact same conditions, 100% overlap. They're also the conditions that make us more anti-fragile. More resilient 2.0, more likely to grow, following a trauma, hardship, difficulty, or challenge. So what are these conditions? The first condition has to do with spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being, we can of course experience as part of religion, through Avodat Hashem, Tefillah, and there are two other elements, part of spiritual well-being. One is finding a sense of meaning or purpose in life. The second is being present, mindful, attending to whatever it is that we're attending to with kavanah. So this is spiritual well-being, meaning and mindfulness, or purpose and presence. Then there is physical well-being. Physical well-being is about nutrition. It's about physical exercise. It's about rest and recovery, Shabbat. It's about the mind-body connection. Nefesh bריאה beguf בריא. A healthy soul, mind, in a healthy body. That's physical well-being. Then we have intellectual well-being. Intellectual well-being also includes two elements. The first element is curiosity, asking questions, being lifelong learners. The second one is all about deep learning, delving deeply into a text or a work of art or nature. Then there is relational well-being, the number one predictor of happiness, quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. It's about being part of a community. It's about kindness and generosity. And finally, emotional well-being. That's about learning to deal with painful emotions. And it's about cultivating pleasurable emotions. And here we have the Spire model. The Spire, the highest point. Aristotle and later Maimonides talked about happiness as the end towards which all other ends lead. And again, whether you look at it, happiness or joy, simcha, rina, gila, osher, many facets to happiness. So I want to go over each one of these and introduce you to some of the teachings of Rabbi Sacks. And when I was preparing this lecture, I knew that I would find parallels between this model of happiness, which brings together the works of Aristotle, Maimonides, as well as Lao Tzu and Helen Keller and Martin Seligman and Sonia Lubomyrsky, and neuroscience and literature and philosophy and history. I knew that I would find parallels in Rabbi Sacks's work. I just didn't think it would be that easy. And it takes me back to a conversation that eventually led to my work with Jerusalem U, and through Jerusalem U with Rabbi Sacks. And it was a conversation with Rabbi Raphael Shore, who was one of the leaders of Aish, and we were filming. This was before Israel Inside, for those of you who watch it. We were filming something for Hasbara. And we were having lunch and we were just chatting about the video, and then we started talking about other things. And we talked about the fact that so many Israelis travel far away to the Far East or to South America after their military service, looking for answers, and I'm all for travel. I think it's wonderful. However, what they don't realize is that so many of the answers are in their own tradition. And we talked about it, and we decided to do some work together beyond Hasbara on showing the parallels between modern day positive psychology, the science of happiness, and Judaism. And that led to years of work together, and also through that to my meeting with and working with Rabbi Sacks. So I knew it would be easy. I didn't think it would be that easy. So what I want to do now is share with you quotes from his work. And after I share the quote, I will share the research on it. And we'll go back and forth, have a conversation with him, conversation about joy. So we begin with spiritual well-being. All the quotes, I didn't put the name, all the quotes are from Rabbi Sacks. Part of the beauty of Judaism, and surely this is so for other faiths also, is that it gently restores control over time. 3 times a day we stop what we're doing and turn to God in prayer. We recover perspective. We inhale a deep breath of eternity. How evocative. We inhale a deep breath of eternity. What he's talking about here is essentially what the research is showing, has been showing for the past 50 years. The importance of stopping, of taking a break, of being mindful, of praying with kavanah. Because what we're doing when we pray with kavanah, we're essentially meditating. We're taking that breath of eternity, bringing us back to the here and now. And we may be going through hardships and difficulties and challenges. But when we're present, we're present. We're gifted with the ability to just focus on what really matters, on what it truly means to be alive, which can only mean to be in the present moment, in the here and now. And when we do it regularly, 3 times a week, 3 times a day, we learn, we cultivate the muscle. And even though our neurons today, they're not really muscles, they function like muscles. As we work them, they grow, they become stronger, and we become more anti-fragile as a result of prayer with kavanah. Today, we have the machinery to show that our brain actually changes, our neural structure morphs, transforms, changes its form as a result of this practice. Elsewhere, Rabbi Sacks writes about the second element of spiritual well-being. Science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together to see what they mean. So we have mindfulness and meaning, the 2 elements of spiritual well-being. And how does meaning contribute to anti-fragility or to happiness in general? Viktor Frankl, in his very important work, Man's Search for Meaning, writes that when we have a what for, every how becomes possible. In other words, what is the what for? It's the meaning that we have in our life, the purpose that we have. And it could be, as it was for Frankl, to see his wife, or to write the book that he had conceived of, or to give a talk to his colleagues. When you have a what for, a sense of meaning, every how becomes possible. And this is what kept him alive, and it is what kept Am Yisrael Chai alive. The fact that we had a what for and have a what for. Every how becomes possible. And this is what Rabbi Sacks understood the importance of faith is all about. That what for, that sense of meaning and purpose. So that's spiritual well-being. Then there is physical well-being. It's remarkable actually how much he wrote about physical well-being. First, religious ritual is a way of structuring time so that we, not employers, the market, or the media, are in control. Life needs its pauses, its chapter breaks, if the soul is to have space to breathe. You know, the number one reason today that I'm called up by companies to give lectures or consult, number one reason is stress. You know that 94% of college students nationwide in the US, 94% are stressed and overwhelmed by everything that they have to do. I don't know what the other 6% are on, but they're doing fine. In the workplace, stress is rising. More and more doctors are talking about stress as the silent killer. The World Health Organization is talking about a stress pandemic. And the question is, what do we do about that stress? So my colleagues and I, for the past 2 decades, longer, have been studying stress. And what we found initially surprised us. Had we delved deeper into the sources, into the Jewish texts, it wouldn't have surprised us. What we found was that actually stress was not the problem. That stress actually potentially is good for us. I mean, think about it. You go to the gym, you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscles? You're stressing them. Is that a bad thing? Not at all. This is exactly what makes you, after 2 days, 4 days, 6 days, 8 days, it makes you stronger, healthier, better, bigger. Because we're an anti-fragile system. The stress is not the problem. When do the problems begin? The problems begin when we go to the gym and we lift weights, and a minute later, more weights, and a minute after that, more, and the day after, again and again. That's when the problems begin. That's when we get injured. That's when we get enervated rather than energized, weaker rather than stronger. The problem's not the stress. The problem rather is the lack of recovery, the absence of breaks, the failure to pause. What healthy, happy, and successful people do, and again, there's a lot of research on it. They experience stress just like we all do. And they punctuate their crazy, busy lives with islands of sanity, where they stop, pause, take a break. And then they grow. In other words, it's the break, it's the space to breathe, quite literally, that triggers the anti-fragile system, whether it's physiologically or psychologically. And what does this break, pause look like? Well, it's all about the Jewish rituals. One of them is Shabbat. A break. Another one is actually the breath. Another one is the prayer, the being present for those 10 minutes or 30 minutes. All forms of recovery, documented, deeply researched, that show that when we engage in them, the anti-fragile system is triggered. The mashber becomes an opportunity for growth. Another element of physical well-being Our bodies were made for movement, standing, walking, and running. Except in the house of the Lord, Jews do not sit. Jewish life began with two momentous journeys: Abraham from Mesopotamia, Moses and the Israelites from Egypt. This is part of our DNA. It's part of human DNA to move. And there's a lot of research on exercise. Regular physical exercise, it turns out, has the same effect on our psychological well-being, on our happiness, as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, working in the same way, releasing norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. These are the feel-good chemicals in the brain. Research by John Ratey, Harvard Medical School. A meta-analysis looking at all the studies that he could find on the relationship between aging and exercise shows that regular physical exercise, even if we started later on in life, reduces the likelihood of Alzheimer and dementia by 52%. There's no medication that comes even close to having this effect. You know, when I looked at all the studies on exercise and well-being, my first thought was, wow, exercising is like taking an antidepressant because it shows similar results. But after further thinking, I realized that's not the case. It's not that exercising is like taking an antidepressant. It's rather that not exercising is like taking a depressant. And that's not just a semantic difference. You see, we weren't made to sit down all day. We were made to hunt, gather, carry the water, cut the wood. It's part of our constitution. Hateva tavua banu. It's embedded in us. We need it. And we shouldn't frustrate a need, because when we frustrate a need, we pay a price. So if our God-given levels of happiness are here, when we don't exercise, it's like taking a depressant. They're reduced. And this is what Rabbi Sacks was talking about. We need to move it, move it. So let's move to intellectual well-being. This, of course, I had to struggle to find or include only two quotes. The embodiment of intellectual well-being. Here is one thing that he writes. To defend a country, you need an army, but to defend a civilization, you need education. If you want a free society, teach your children what oppression tastes like. Tell them how many miracles it takes to get from here to there. Above all, encourage them to ask questions. Teach them to think for themselves. In other words, make them curious. The number one element of intellectual well-being. And there's a lot of research showing that when we are curious, we're not just happier, we actually become more anti-fragile. Not only that, we also live longer. So people who ask questions, who are lifelong learners, are healthier and live longer. All other things being equal. So you know the saying, curiosity kills the cat? It's the opposite with human beings, it turns out. It makes us live longer. This is what Rabbi Sacks was talking about here. But he didn't stop here when he talked about intellectual well-being. It's not just about asking questions and learning. It's a very specific kind of learning that he advocated. He writes, focus on the mind and the soul. Read, study, enroll in a course of lectures, pray, become a member of a religious congregation, study the Bible or other ancient works of wisdom. He's here talking about deep learning. Looking at the Bible, reading and rereading it. One of the greatest faults of modern education is that the focus is on superficial reading. Oh, I read George Eliot's Daniel Deronda, check. Oh, I already read the Bible, check. Now I can move on to the works of Shakespeare or to the newspaper, which I haven't read yet. Check. Go over as much material as possible. Whereas Rabbi Sacks, whereas our tradition focuses on what? Reading and rereading. Every year, the same parasha. Every 7 years, the same daf. Every day, the same texts. 3 times a day, some texts. Why? You already know it. You know, when I was 7, I knew the tefillah off by heart. Why do you need to read and reread it? Because it's about deep learning. It's about engaging with text. It's about dedicating your life to learning. And that contributes to a lot of things. Among them, happiness, anti-fragility, and also success. I asked my grandfather once, how is it that your grandfather and your father were good businessmen? They lived in the Ukraine, other side Vienna. How come they were good businessmen? They didn't go to HBS. I know that for a fact. How? Every day they studied. They read and reread the same texts. They asked questions of each other. And their ability to engage deeply with the text enabled them to also engage deeply with a contract that they were signing or a business deal that was offered. They could understand it. Deeply, well, and that contributed to their ability to deal with life well. So that's intellectual well-being, curiosity and deep learning. And then relational well-being, the number one predictor of happiness, the number one predictor of post-traumatic growth. Oops. Never be content with creating systems. Care also about relationships. I believe that relationships are where our humanity is born and grows, flowers and flourishes. His use of the word flourishes is not random. This is the translation that we use today for eudaimonia, which is the word that Aristotle used for happiness, which is what the Rambam studied and understood as happiness. And today we know, through many studies, how important relationships are, how important a community is for dealing with hardship. Number one predictor of anti-fragility, of resilience 2.0, of post-traumatic growth. And how do we cultivate these healthy relationships? There's an answer to that too. The best way of encountering God is to give. The very act of giving flows from or leads to the understanding that what we give is part of what we were given. Happiness is not made by what we own. It is what we share. This is in a drasha on Parashat Truma. You know, I speak to many non-Jewish audiences as well. There's one Hebrew word that I teach them, whether I'm speaking here, or whether I'm speaking in Africa. One Hebrew word that I teach them. And that is the word to give. And on the screen, I put the word. And I say in Hebrew, it's Natan. Comes from the root Natan, like the name Nathan. And I show them how it's written. In Roman letters, it's N-A-T-A-N. In Hebrew, it's Nun Taf Nun. And they look at it and they get it immediately. It's a palindrome. It's symmetrical. It's no coincidence. Because when we give, whether it's truma or kindness, or when we lend our ear and listen, what we're doing is giving and receiving. And Rabbi Sacks, in a number of his drashot, emphasizes this. We encounter God. We find happiness. We become stronger, better able to deal with hardships. And you see it in Israel today, and you see it in the Jewish communities here today. How much giving is there? Volunteering, whether it's the Sefer Torah, or whether it's picking oranges from the tree. Contributing, giving, becoming a community through giving. Netina. And finally, emotional well-being. This Rabbi Sacks wrote after he lost his father. He wrote this about his experience. Sometimes all the pain and the tears lift you to a much higher and deeper joy when you say to the bad times, I will not let you go until you bless me. Referring, of course, to Yaakov. I will not let you go until you bless me. What does that mean? It means that in every pain, suffering, like the pain and suffering we are going through right now as a people, there is the potential for growth. And it's not about suppressing or repressing that growth. Because, in the words of psychologist Kirsten Neff, the only way out is through. It's about giving ourselves the permission to experience the full range of human emotions. Because paradoxically, when we do that, that's when we actually grow stronger. This creates the soil, the fertile soil, upon which we actually flourish. I mean, think about it. Even if it's on a smaller micro scale rather than the macro scale that we're experiencing now. Think about your life. What have been the most important, meaningful growth experiences that you had? Usually, not always, but usually, hardships, difficulties, traumas. I will not let you go until you bless me. The foundation, that soil of anti-fragility is giving ourselves the permission to be human, or to put it in a much broader sense. The first step to happiness is allowing in unhappiness. Because the paradox is that when we reject painful emotions, they only intensify, they grow stronger. The only way out is through. Emotional well-being, it's not just about dealing with painful emotions, it's also about cultivating pleasurable ones. And specifically, it's this emotion. Faith is about saying thank you, even in the darkest of times. Rabbi Sacks has a beautiful drasha about about Tfilat Amidah, where he says that when the Chazan goes over the Tfilah, we sit down and we listen. There's only one part where we were also participating, and that's in Modim, when we express gratitude, because each one has to do it by him or herself. You're not absolved by someone else doing it for you. You have to do it yourself. Time and again, he talked about the first word that we say in the morning. Modeh. Not modeh ani, The first word is modeh, grateful I am. Twisted sentence. That's not how you speak in Hebrew or English. Grateful I am to you. I'm grateful to you, you would say. But no, the first word in the morning is not I. It's grateful. Rabbi Sacks wrote about joy. But more than anything, he himself was an ode to joy. He embodied what a happy life looks like. Not a life devoid of suffering or pain or crises. Not a life where, oh, happiness is just pleasure. I was so happy having that ice cream. I'm so happy lying on the beach. Yeah, nice things, of course. But happiness is much deeper and higher than that. And when we understand it as such, we realize that it's not just important when things are going well. It's important always. For the entire gamut of human experience. The happiness that endures, he says, is the happiness that changes us, that challenges us to become more than we were. And we're challenged now as a people, whether it's here in America, whether it's in Eretz Israel. We're challenged as a people. But what Ode to Joy reminds us is that if we continue to pursue our God-given path to joy, if we continue to pursue those elements that Rabbi Sacks highlights in our tradition, in our texts, that we read and reread, then not only will this pass, but as it passes, we will transform and grow and become stronger, better, healthier, even happier as individuals and as a people. Am Yisrael Chai.